J Beans?
J and Beans.
Oh, J and Beans?
Yeah.
Yo, all that's eventual. All I gotta tell y'all is I told y'all in 2002, and y'all ain't believe me. I told y'all that nigga was a crab, and y'all ain't believe me. You know what I'm saying? How many accounts gotta come up? Dane, Biggs, R. Kelly, Kiss, Beans. I mean, the list go on. That nigga's a crab. It ain't no hate involved, but you know, you gonna see. He's still biting my style. Jaz-O's the best. Secret Society with Jay-Z, man. He's involved, but he's involved with this shit, man. He involved with that play shit. Like, see, people don't understand the science behind Satan, Lucifer, and God. And if you notice, he calls himself Jehovah or Hove. And before they started retranslating, you know, the New American version of the Bible, you know, Jehovah was known as a jealous God in the Bible. But I'm gonna give people the simple and general overstanding that all of those people, many of those prophets in the Bible, and even when you talk about these different deities in the Bible, they were not people. Even when you go into the Egyptian pantheon, like, they weren't people. But as far as Homeboy, like, it's really a bunch of Masons. See, the whole Freemason thing is based on a lower level of understanding. Like, the real secrets have never been revealed. They weren't supposed to be revealed. So all these people, they walking around like they know something for real, but they don't really know shit. You know, and he doing those little signs and all of that. Those are symbols that have been out there. They've been propagating them shits for a few thousand years. But number one, anybody who knows high magic knows that those shits don't have any power anymore. Number two, you know, everybody knows what they basically mean, like the understanding of it. Like, you know, as far as the pyramid and stuff like that I'm not really gonna go into. But I'm saying that simply to say that dude think he knows shit, but he still don't know shit. He could get as many degrees as he want, but it's just like trying to get all degrees you want, but you still got a ceiling. He can't go but so high because the people that he worshiping, that he kissing their ass and letting them feel him up and shit, they don't know shit. They trying to find out every day from us. That's why they follow hip hop. That's why they follow the blues. That's why they follow soul. That nigga's nothing. That's my son, unfortunately.
We know that DC is in the shape of the diamond. The minister raised the diamond. It's found out that Benjamin Banneker in 1791 laid a stone every 1 mile on the original boundaries of DC. The diamond is not an arbitrary shape or symbol. It means something. The diamond means something. In fact, if you look up the diamond in the dictionary of symbols, the diamond talks about something coming out of the Greek word Adonis, meaning unconquerable. In emblems, it often indicates the irradiant mystic center. The mystic center. Why would a diamond be considered a luminous being? So people tell me they're looking for the Illuminati. I said, well, where are you looking? Where are you looking? What did you break down? Are you listening to what it's saying? What are they saying? That somewhere in the diamond is a mystic center. So people want to check what it was they were talking about and what those things meant. So we go back. Here's Tony Browder even talking about the diamond in D.C. and how Jefferson, on behalf of Washington, decided it would be a diamond shape. And the role of the square shape and the role of Elephant, who of course was led around by Banneker. The Washington Post, well no, this is in the Dictionary of Symbols by Biederman. When people start using these, the number 4. What does the number 4 mean? So we talk about the number 4, taking you back to that 4-letter name of God, the Hebrew tetragrammation. What did they say that the diamond was? They said that this year also meant the is what the Masons laid. So when they answer Farrakhan in the number 4, they go back to him raising up what the pyramid and all CNI really means. And they answered him in front of everybody. Says the number 4 is associated with the cross and the square. The cross and the square. So when you look back at Tony Browder's description of the area, he lays it out in a cross. It says it's based on the concept of the square.
Hey, welcome to Southern California, KPFK, Brother Steve Coakley.
Hey, good evening, brother.
One of our great researchers that have exposed the Boulé, a phenomenon that most of us in the movement never knew about until you brought light, took the sheets off of these Negro Klan members and explained to us what the Boulé is all about. So what we'd like you to do is tell us the history of the Boulé, who the Boulé are, their origins, and their relationship to the ruling class.
Thank you, brother. One, I would thank you for hosting me and my friends here, and appreciate you and all your company. Everybody's excessively intense, and that is the demand of the day. This secret society, this particular black secret society that we'll talk about today, is the first of the black Greek societies, started in 1904. And that word that you said, Boulé, is actually an acronym. It's a Sigma Pi Phi. Sigma Pi Phi, 1904 in Philadelphia. And for most of our people, we are not prepped to the responsibility of secret society in the American society. Mm-hmm. And this founding constitution, this illegal criminal enterprise, was a Masonic affair. And a Masonry is a form of secret society. There are other well-known secret societies like Skull and Bones at Yale, of which this corrupt president and his father were members of. And it is that society that the black society modeled itself after. So when they wrote their first history book, The History of Sigma Pi Phi, by a very noted black author, University President Charles Wesley, who wrote the history book for the Elks, the Prince Hall Masons, National Council of Negro Women, Alpha Phi Alpha, and Sigma Pi Phi. And as a result, in page 28 of its first history book, it noted that it wanted to be like Skull and Bones at Yale. It was right here in Los Angeles at the Good Life on a Friday night. If you remember this time, the NAACP had a convention here, and LeGrand Klieg and Marla Gibbs were accused of making inflammatory statements.
Working with Dr. Graham's book, The Mannequin Light Motif.
Yes, that weekend, the Boulé was meeting here, July of 1990. They were having their twice every other year convention, biannual. And it was a front page article in the LA Times by Karen Grigsby Gates, who denoted that these elite black men were meeting in Los Angeles at this time. That was the first. I remember sending someone to the car to bring it in, and we read it from the stage of the Boulé on July 18th, the day the story appeared, front page LA Times. And I thought it was unusual that the LA Times knew of this society, and I didn't know of them. Now, for our audience to understand, I'm starting off trying to explain to black people the impact of international policy groups like the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, when the bankers began to take over the American cities in the 70s, New York 75, Cleveland 77, Chicago 79, and here in California they used Proposition 13 to suck up the surplus out the budget, and bankers began to take over from municipalities the governing of the cities. And as I was scratching, I could not figure out how was there such black complicity in this centralization of worldwide power, the New World Order. It's on the dollar bill, pyramid by white men who never built one, never saw one, but they emulated this symbol. And now comes a series of societies, and now comes forth this black one in 1904. As we began to read deeper, it had another analogy in the story to Skull and Bones. It wasn't until we got the history book that the analogy that looked happenstantial in the story in the LA Times was actually deeper in the actual history book, where they drew attention to Skull and Bones. It denoted that W.E.B. Du Bois was a member, and it began to describe people, influential people in the present-day society, and historically, our university, historically black college presidents are primarily coming out of this, advisors to the king. And that word, that Boulé word, can be looked up in a encyclopedia. Well, now people don't use them, they use internet. And that's a dangerous thing, a dangerous dependency. But Boulé, B-O-U-L-E, the Greek version. There's a French version that's a coming together, a conclave, the AKA called their convention, the Boulé. But the Greek word is what we're looking for, the advisors to the king. The lower house of the Greek parliament is called Boulé. And if you know the American congressional system, Senate, 6 years, more power, authority, only 100. 2 per state. Congress, 435, have to run every 2 years. Your lower house has less power and authority. So it appears as if, in finding the Boulé, that within it was a subordination to something else. And in its history book, it drew attention. Here's a logo. And this is their logo is a Grecian sphinx. It's an animal. And this Grecian sphinx is similar to a griffin or a gargoyle. Kind of ironically, the Boulé had their convention in Los Angeles in 1941. And where else? Griffin Park. And this logo, this symbol, is a guardian animal. This would be similar to a Rottweiler or a dog or a German Shepherd. They tend to protect something higher than itself.
Let me ask you a question. I went to Howard University, for instance, and a number of African so-called Greek societies, fraternities, as well as in our community, there's a number of secret, semi-secret organizations. How is the Boulé different than the numerous fraternities and groups in our community? What is the relationship to the ruling class?
Father, son. The nine make up the axis of the Black Greek dynasty. There are 4 male societies, 4 female societies, and the Boulé make the 9th one. They're the first, 1904 series, the Alphas. I'm not versed in the exact order, but I have all of their history books, and each of them draw attention to things where they got their ritual from. The Deltas draw attention to Freemasonry, said our ritual came from Mary Church Terrell, whose husband, Robert Terrell, was head of the Masonic Lodge in Washington, D.C. Mary Church Terrell, Mary Church, is the daughter of the first black millionaire in America, Robert Church of Memphis, Tennessee. Huge mausoleum to him there. Those societies, those 4 male, those 4 female, and the Boulé tend to make up a aristocracy. We talked in the park about the 10%, not in the sense of us in exclusivity, but them in the terms of deputizing 10% of the population to assure that the 90% never catch on. And it's very important to know that if you look to Alpha Phi Alpha website, there's alphas, kappas, Qs, and Phi Beta Sigma. There's Zeta Phi Beta, Delta Sigma Theta, AKA, and Delta, I'm missing somebody, Sigma Gamma Rho. If you look to, say, the Alpha website, they brag about being 95% of all black lawyers. Now, if the Alphas are 95% of the black lawyers, what does that leave the Kappas, the Qs? Okay, now we're in the 90s. They claim to be 65% of the black accountants, the lawyers, the doctors, dominating. And it may be that our professions are dominated by people in the Greek societies. At Howard, there was a student that I tried to help get a doctorate in engineering. Very exclusive about giving them out. If you get one, you're set for life. Morgan State, Howard are very exclusive. Took big money from governments to make engineers, but the brothers weren't coming out. And when we got deeply involved, we found how close-knit, how selective the professional process is. So he ended up at the patent office. He was a Kappa. He said, we have 15 blacks, 1 female, 14 brothers, and all 14 of us are Kappas. Only Kappas going to get in here. And there are jobs all over where we think we're applying for something fair and open. But I would suggest that the ruling class recognized this was a very significant period, D-Don, when they decided that they would give a college degree to a person of African ancestry in America who, after Reconstruction, should have been pretty pissed off. And so they were very weak about it to Africans in America. Only 2,000. So there was this thing they went through, a born man versus the made man. The born man, the king and the queens of Europe, had to deputize people to colonize the lands, the Columbuses and the Cecil Rhodeses who went to Africa. They weren't the aristocracy, but they fought to be gladiators and colonists and explorers. The Lewis and Clark, who were Masons, these men used the societies to advance the wishes of the ruling class, and they set up a system, a circle within a circle, within another circle. Each circle protected the circle within it. So when you look to that Boulé logo, you see there's an urn. There's an animal with the wing of the bird, the tail of a lion, and it's got an urn, and it's got its paw over the urn, and it says in the history book number 2 by Hobart Jarrett that in the urn are the names of the people who are chosen to lead the state, which suggests that part of the society function is not to make known who the people of power and authority are. And one of their most serious indictments to this society is what they were used to do against Marcus Garvey.
Could you explain that, please?
Marcus Garvey, who began to surge for Africa, the Negro was breaking free, doesn't have a good reason to get with the white American establishment.
You're right.
They don't have a good reason.
They're not getting paid.
They just built the country, got set free, didn't get the 40 acres and the mule, got reconstructed when they began to move into the southern houses and the Senate. They got reconstructed and knocked back. So there's disarray in our community. And this is before the industrial cities of Chicago and others began to have steel and the stock markets. These are cattle, not bonds, where people began to work, and the South fled to the North to work in those factories. And Robert Abbott, who was a Boulé man from Chicago defender, who it was a period when all the black editors were brought into Washington and told that they would have cracked down on Marcus Garvey, and their newspapers were not to be used. The Pittsburgh Courier, Chicago Defender, the Afro-American in Baltimore and Washington. All of these are Boulé families, the advisors to the king, this group. So when Marcus Garvey came, whites began to think that maybe assimilation is better. Maybe we can escalate. Let's not let these go. Maybe they don't seem too pissed off about all of this. Maybe they'll forgive these things we did to their ancestors, and maybe we can trick them, have a little, want some more. So as Garvey began to move, they began to see that a Harlem Renaissance could have been necessary, that they could then attract Africans in America into literature and science and the arts and poetry. And when he said back to Africa, he's trying to get to Liberia. So R.R. Moulton, who was a big Boulé man from Tuskegee University, who replaced Booker T. Washington, R.R. Moulton became a spy for the U.S. government to coordinate the program against Marcus Garvey in America. We have declassified documents that came out in 1993. The Memphis Commercial Appeal did the story about Martin King, Kwame Ture. A lot of things came out about spying. Well, in that, which did not make the public press, when we actually filed for the documents, There was R.R. Moulton telling Von Demon at Military Intelligence, don't tell anyone what I'm going to tell you about what Marcus Garvey said last night in Harlem, you know, and the letters marked confidential. And, of course, eventually R.R. Moulton, who went to Liberia, was given $5 million to form a committee to keep Marcus Garvey out of Liberia. He never made it. He wanted to get there bad. They put $5 million, now $5 million in 1919, man, this is 50 million, 100 million today. Inconceivable. And they rewarded R.R. Moulton for trying to undermine Marcus Garvey. He got the first, check this deep, he got the first black veterans hospital in the United States at Tuskegee. And then what did they give him for reward? Syphilis. You see the reward? See, he got something.
No back.
But what they got was bad, you know, what they gave him, you know.
So let me ask you, so in essence what you're saying is that the Boulé represents the buffer class, the petit bourgeois, the comprador buffer class that manages Africa's workers, peasants, students, and middle class in many ways, and are paid well for that. And they receive their direct orders from the European capitalist class.
Yes, if you were to look to today, where Boulé members like Vernon Jordan, who is managing director of Goldman Sachs, he took Bill Clinton to his first Bilderberger meeting in 1971. The black man took the white man from Arkansas to the big international meeting. Vernon Jordan, former head of the Urban League, who groomed Ron Brown, who then went on to become Secretary of Commerce, killed in a plane crash, murdered, because Boulé are considered domestic. Martin King was Boulé. Look at the relationship between Martin and Kwame over going against the war. You don't hear anybody in the African-centered community primarily against the war. They're basically accepting it or looking for what they try to get when whites are passing out things like, you know, a grant here, this or that. They don't appear to be focused on that money that's being wasted, those billions of dollars.
You saying African, the Afrocentric community
Africans
support the war?
They are not, no, I'm just saying they are not pushing against the war. Say way Martin King,
I understand what you're saying.
When April 4th of
you're
67,
right. You're right.
1 year before he was killed to the day, when he came out of Riverside Church with Kwame in a shirt and tie in the front row, waiting to hear, because he called and said, you got to hear this. He comes out against the war. Boulé men are told to be domestic, not international. Mickey Leland was Sigma Pi Phi. He tried to stop a starvation going on in Ethiopia, Somalia. His plane crashes into the mountain. Congressman from Texas, he dies. Ron Brown, Martin King, no question. Martin King became international, and that became his biggest sin. He was financed by some of the greatest foundations America ever had to offer. But if they get beyond the defined limit, then there's trouble.
In terms of young people today who are on college campuses who want to join fraternities and sororities, what is your advice?
It's interesting, the movie Stomp the Yard. I thought that was an interesting attempt to try to reconstruct the options, because they are catching hell in the streets. There is a rise of Kemetic-centered, African-centered societies that are repudiations of Greeks. And this is on the rise on many of the campuses around the country. And many of those fraternities and sororities, like the American military, were finding reduced numbers. Questions of hazing and brutality. And see, that's an important thing about a secret society, is the initiation or the ritual, which is an act of submission. I would never want anyone to underestimate when someone goes on that line and they beat them or they make them do things or unusual things or ridicule them, that act is an act of submission, and that's very essential to keeping a secret society in order. How do you command that subordination? And so for today, when they're on the campuses, they see the Boulé. If you look to the Boulé Journal, you can look up sigmapiphi.net. You can hit up my website, stevecoakley.com, and then you can link into their website. You look at their Boulé Journal, you see what they play up there, the head of everything. They're announcing every key position they have. They're the advisor to every person, every corporation. They're the black head of American Express. You know, we can just walk on down the line of those that roles were theirs and only theirs. No one got past. You know, I noticed that Harold Washington, our black mayors were uniquely Boulé. Andy Young when he was Atlanta, Dinkins when he was New York, Bradley when he was Los Angeles. But none of those men were able to groom their man. So Bradley was mayor 20 years, but didn't have Bradley too. You know, Dinkins couldn't turn it over to anybody. Them white folk walked and beat on his door to run him out. Different cities. Detroit, Coleman Young was not a Boulé member. Harold Washington was not a Boulé member. And the relationship between the white financial firms and Harold Washington was uniquely different than it was with men who were more trusted.
Brother Steve.
Yeah, it just made me think about something we had talked about. You know, as a young brother in Chicago, really wanting to get involved in the movement. When I came back from college, there were various options. Was in Chicago, and the black politics at 75 was still dominated by Mayor Daley, Ralph Metcalf, who was the first person to break away, whose assistant was Harold Washington, who eventually became the mayor. That first congressional district, which Bobby Rush, former Black Panther, is the congressman in now. That district, we had Hakeem Mahabuti there. Bobby Wright was on the west side. The NAACP, the Urban League.
Elijah Muhammad.
Yes, I was going to say, the minister actually came to Chicago just a couple of years later when Elijah Muhammad died, and he was brought in from New York and then stripped by Wallace D. And he stayed in Chicago. With that period of coming back, there was not a lot of things to get involved in. As I'm scratching, I found a book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy. It's a white, right-wing kind of guide book. And it says sometimes some things about us are communists or something. But I looked through that and I saw relationships with General Electric and Exxon Mobil, and I looked at all, and these relationships I started to research. It wasn't until I found them in Chicago that Chicago accepted what I was trying to say. We used to have one radio show came on WJPC, Johnson Publishing, who is Boulé, Ebony Jet, etc. And Vernon Jarrett was the host of the show, who I didn't know was head of the Boulé at that time, Chicago Tribune columnist, started AXO for the NAACP. And one day I called in and I was trying to explain some of this stuff, and he cut me off. He said, we're not going to have any of that. I didn't know he was Boulé. When I ended up becoming special assistant to the mayor, the other special assistant was Erwin France, who was head of Model Cities under Mayor Daley. He was an alpha like the mayor, they buddies, all of this and that, but I was a threat to him, but I didn't know at that time he was head of the Boulé. It wasn't until later. And then that's when I went to my friends, my African-centered friends in Chicago, and said, hey, man, I'm researching these white folks, and I think I found the black folks connected to the white folks. And then I started finding black folks' names, African-centered black folks' names. Jay Carruthers, and now Jay Carruthers is my hero in Chicago. He's in a group with Bobby and Conrad and Bob Starks, a lot of people, Anderson Thompson, people I love. He said, man, we got to talk. Let's talk about that. And I started looking up other names. I saw Asa Hilliard's name, and so I felt that as I began to get deeper into this relationship, I began to notice that my African-centered friends were less happy about me getting to the bottom of this, and they wanted to focus me on, I remember they taking me in a room. I used to work for Bobby Wright. I remember them taking me in the research room. They had put this map of the United States, and they had all these little pin boards on Montana, Utah, Wyoming. Said, now we want you to focus on these guys. I said, well, what bank do they run? And I was trying to say that the First National Bank of Chicago was Chase Manhattan, because the guy left Chase, came to Chicago, took it over. Well, time came. First National Bank of Chicago merged with Bank One of Ohio. They merged with the National Bank of Detroit. That's the region. They all merged with Chase, who had just merged with J.P. Morgan. And now Rockefeller got the banks from New York all the way to Chicago, nonstop. Every one of them locked down. But the Chicago was resistant to accepting this focus. See, why aren't our people focused on Exxon Mobil? Why no protests against high-ass oil prices, I make my children know who's on the boards of all these corporations, the private equity firms that own all of the stock, Vanguard, Wellington, Global, Barclay Global. These companies are obscure to our community. We're not knowing. We're not focusing on the white supremacy that's coming at us. The Klan is not a threat to our African community. They're not coming in the neighborhood, but Chase and Goldman Sachs and Lazard Perez and Standard & Poor's and Moody's, obscure bond rating companies that can control cities that our people don't mess with, I showed in Chicago and Cincinnati, which had one of the best boycotts of any city. That's right. It is. I mean, it was, and it still went on. Just last weekend, they tried to come back with a big festival. Mary J. Blige pulled out. Some more people pulled out. Kind of made it lose money. And but there, In Cincinnati, we targeted 3 people: the Taft family, which runs the state, Skull and Bones. Taft family still today. The governor was just left as governor. We targeted Procter and Gamble, and we targeted Carl Linder, who owned Chiquita Bananas. And when we got through harassing Chiquita Bananas, some of our friends at the radio station there had stock, $119 a share. When we finished with him, it went to $5.40 a share, and he sold Chiquita. Now, what I'm trying to say is there's a vulnerability in America that has not been exercised by our community because our secret societies have been pledged never to tell us those vulnerabilities. They work for them. They patch them. They protect them. They act like they don't exist, but they serve them. And they never utter against them, even never whisper to us. If you saw on that Boulé tape when we were there messing at the convention, I told my buddies, we're not here to recruit them. We don't want them to be better brothers. We want to warn them that if they're the guard dog on white supremacy, when we jump the fence, what you going to do? You going to bite, you going to fight, or you going to run out and let us get to who we after? But how do we get to who we after when we got all this wing and wang out here, all this distraction, all this misfocusing, and then is there complicity in our community? When some people killed Martin King, when some people killed Malcolm X, did that neutralize our present leadership, who are byproducts of assassination? Did this put us in a bind? Do we have a lot of old paper out there that white folks work when they want to keep us in a bind that we don't seem to talk back? How can they make $10 billion in 90 days in an oil company that was broken up when a white woman attacked them in 1911, Tarbell? They broke them companies up, them Standard Oils. And then they brought them all back together. Exxon got with Mobil, Chevron got back with Texaco, and all the things Rockefeller broke up got put back together.
Let me ask you a question. So would you say, because it seems to me the common denominator of all the corporations in the system you're talking about is capitalism/imperialism. So that in fact, organizations that are anti-capitalist as a theoretical formulation and specifically target these multinational corporations, oligarchies, that is the path of liberation for African people and destruction of this economic and political system. And maybe that's why also in this historical period we exist today, you find that very few so-called African nationalist or progressive organizations are anti-capitalist. In fact, what they're saying is we want to be part of the system as opposed to attack capitalism, but we want black capitalists instead of European capitalists.
And you know, it's the one thing we have to be careful for as time has progressed. If you were to go to Toynbee Hall in London when they created social work, when the rich felt it was necessary to infiltrate the poor so that they aspired through the tentacles of the rich that had been spread out amongst them, that if you fought capitalism all day and you ended up not fighting the social service network, you would find there's another aspect that might not even pledge to be capitalist at all, might pledge to be helping the people.
But most of those social service networks are either financed by nonprofits, churches, foundations, the state, cultural affairs departments of different different cities, some we can go down a whole list of these funding sources. So in the final analysis, if we go after the capitalist system as a theoretical formulation, but pinpoint, as you say, with laser hair, focus the specific corporations as a category to be assessed, especially in terms of the impact upon African people, like you say, the Poor's, the Standard, and these multiple bond associations that finance or definance infrastructure in our communities, and as capitalists now going to Iraq and Afghanistan to build their economic and social structure at the expense of ours.
There is a web. There is a web. There's sports. They're the media. They're education. They're social service. They're astronauts. They're the church. They are all of that. They are the secret societies too. And they all work in a loose-knit fashion, and they keep disagreements within a manageable limit.
I can learn from you. I can learn from that channel. I can learn from the mind of Adept HNIC.